Winter is coming, so why not dress like a medieval peasant? Or remember what it was like to be an adventurer before you took that arrow to the knee. When I tell you that this will be one of the most easiest pieces of clothing or costume pieces that you will make, you have to believe me. And while it might be easy to make, it will also keep you warm while you're out adventuring. To make this lovely medieval Viking hood, yes, hood, you will need 1 or 2 pieces of fabric, depending on whether you are lining this hood or not. So if you're just planning on making the outer shell, which would be the perfect choice for a beginner, then you'll only need some fabric for the outer shell, or just basically to make the hood. If you are going to line your hood, you will need 2. I used wool for the outer edge, so I opted to line mine, and I'm happy I did because the wool is rather itchy and scratchy, and if you have any sort of sensory issues with fabrics like that, then you're going to want to put something on the inside next to your body so you don't feel the itchiness of the wool. So if you're like me and you rip tags out of all your clothing because you hate the way it feels against your skin, then maybe choose a fabric that either A, feels nice against your skin, or B, line it with something else that feels nice against your skin. You will need a piece of fabric at least 45 by 45 inches, which is approximately 2 yards of fabric that you're going to want to get. I think a yard is 30 inches, so if you get 2 yards, you should have enough to make this hood. And you'll have some extra in case you mess up. The measurements I used to make this Viking hood are based off a hood that my husband had made previously, Mr. Pamarky, for his Viking costume that he made and wore around Iceland and made me take pictures of him. I tried his on, so I knew it would fit me well, and I decided to make mine the same size. You can upsize it or downsize depending on what you feel would be correct for you. If you are questioning that, you can do a mock-up with some scrap fabric or an old sheet, and then just sew that together and see if it actually fits you well before you cut into your good fabric. This hood is so easy to make. It's made out of squares. And so for the size that I made, you need 1 30 by 30 inch square and 2 15 by 15 inch squares. Let me tell you, measuring out a square on a piece of fabric that keeps shifting around was probably the most annoying part of this project. Because of the wool I was using kept stretching and moving every time I kept measuring for 30 by 30 inches and then remeasuring to make sure I had that correct, my measurements kept changing. So that was not very much fun. I could have probably avoided this by making a paper pattern first. However, I thought, in my infinite wisdom, that cutting out a square would be simple enough, so why would I need to pattern that on some paper ahead of time? Once I finally had my 30 by 30 inch square measured correctly, and my 2 15 by 15 inch squares measured correctly, I cut them out. So then I used the squares that I cut out for the outer fabric to mark for the lining fabric before I cut them out, so I knew that they were the same size. Now I'll let Past Pam explain how to sew these 3 squares together to make a hood.
This top edge is the top part of your hood that goes on your head. This is the front.
Since Past Pam did a terrible job of explaining this, so here's VoiceOver Pam to hopefully do a better job. You will also need to cut a line up the center of the largest square from the midline of the bottom side. I forgot to mention that before. Then fold that piece in half, right side to right side. The smaller squares get folded to make triangles and attached at the front and back of the larger piece. Ooh, look at that, a hood shape. Fold up the bottom flap of the bigger square that we can now do because we cut that piece on the one side. Pin the front square to the bottom front edge of the larger piece, right side to right side. Fold the small square back into a triangle shape and then fold the flap of the larger square back down over it and pin the second front edge of the hood to the other side of the smaller square. Then flip the whole piece over and repeat for the other side. Pin the small square to the bottom edge, right side facing right side. Fold that square to make a triangle again, and flip the flap of the larger square back over that triangle. Then pin up the edge that is now on top. Then finally pin up the top part of the hood. If you're daring like me, you can always flip the hood right side out again and try it on to see if you pinned it together correctly before you sew it together. Hooray! You did it! Congratulations! Hope you didn't poke your eye out trying it on. And now all we're gonna do, after we've pinned all that together, we're gonna sew them up. Yay! If you really want to be historically accurate, you could hand sew this, but I do not have the drive or time to hand sew things, so I used a sewing machine. Also, if you don't have a sewing machine, you can hand sew this and make one of these hoods. I sewed up the top of the hood piece first, and then sewed on the front and back squares. Then repeated this fun step for the liner fabric. The next step is completely optional, but you can add some embroidery to snazz up your Viking hood. This is something that I wanted to do, but I really didn't know how to do, so I did what any sane person would do and bought an embroidery kit to practice. Is it sane though? I'll let you decide. I think it was a perfectly reasonable option to practice what I needed to do before I did it on this. Then I practiced long enough to learn the stitch I needed to embroider my hood. So, not very long. In fact, I didn't get through the entire kit. Will I complete the kit one day and practice all of the stitches? Or will it get tossed into the pile of my craft supplies and never be seen again? Only time will tell. You could vote below and tell me what you think. Will I actually do it or not? I had Mr. Pamarkey create some runes for me to adorn my Viking hood. He has a bit of an obsessive interest in anything Viking, and that goes back to being very historically accurate for things, including languages. So he kindly wrote out a couple of phrases for me so that I could use them as templates and put them on my hood. Then I spent a couple of hours chain stitching these phrases on my hood, and one of them is a phrase, the other is a name. I almost want you to guess what it is, because one of the phrases, this one here, I said at the beginning of my video. And the other one, well, that's me. Yes, might be slightly narcissistic, embroidering your own name on the hood you made for the YouTube channel that has your name in it. So I ended up tracing out the runes onto the hood with some fabric chalk. Then I spent a couple of hours chain stitching on my hood while I watched the X-Files. It was good times. I think sometimes the best part of crafting is doing a craft while binge watching a show that you really like. Then I spent some frustrating time sewing the liner to the hood. First I sewed the hood opening part, this part here. I sewed the liner to the hood on wrong. I had it flipped inside the wrong way, so then when I pulled it out, the inside and the outside were not the way they should be going. And it used more brain cells than I care to admit to figure out which way it needed to go. Then I thought I could sew around the bottom edge of the hood as well and leave a hole after I had sewn this part together to just pull the whole thing through and reverse it and flip it out and then just stitch up that final little hole I made. It made perfect sense in my head. Why wouldn't you be able to do that? Well, it turns out you can't do that. So don't do that. It doesn't work very well. Also, if you are lining your hood with two thicker pieces of fabric, like you're putting a fleece on the inside and the edges aren't going to fray or something, you can blanket stitch around the edge. So you would just hold the two pieces together and do a blanket stitch around the edge. So, which would make it so much easier to sew the front to the back. So if you are lining it and you don't want to be overly frustrated, you could do that. Then I sadly had to rip out the seam for the face opening part of the hood a second time. I finished sewing up the liner at the bottom and then flipped the whole thing inside itself once more. Then I decided the best way to sew this part of the hood up, so to sew the liner to the outer edge, was to fold in the edges so that the edge of the material was tucked in, and then top stitch around the whole thing. And then for good measure, I top stitched around the entire bottom with a red thread, and once again around the opening of the hood at the top, and made sure I connected here at the bottom really well as well. And lo and behold, I now have my very own Viking hood. I really love how this thing turned out. It reminds me a bit of cyberpunk Viking with the runes on it, especially with the color of fabric that I chose. I will be making more costume pieces to go with this over the next year so that I can have a whole outfit. Mr. Pamarkey already has one, so I need to match his vibes for when we go to the Ren Fair next year. So stay tuned for more of that. Before you go, YouTube thinks you'd love this video, so you definitely should watch that next. My name is Pam, and this is Total Pamarkey, the craft channel with a little anarchy. Until next time, bye.